All right, y'all, we are moving on to self-care, which would also include self-awareness and taking care of yourself. This is what we talked about in our group discussion board this week. And for those of you who have had me in any of the classes that I've taught before, and certainly this one as well, you will hear that theme of self-care coming up over and over and over again. The reason why it's so important to me is that this was a very tough lesson for me to learn, and it's one that I continue to learn, and probably the most important lesson that I learn, and the most important thing that I take time and spend on developing in my own life. So, self-care is something that is essentially taking care of yourself. It is exactly what the word says. But I think the reason that it can be so difficult is two things. As helpers, or people that are interested in helping others, we are often trained to think about others far before we would ever think about ourselves. And that's a very noble thing, and that's very unique to people in the helping profession. That's not something I would ever ask you to get rid of. I think that's very important. But what the problem is that most people who are very passionate about helping other people miss out on is taking care of themselves, and they start to find themselves feeling frazzled, desperate, frantic, confused, burnt out, overly emotional, or not emotional at all, and numbing out. And that's because we forget this very important piece of taking care of ourselves, recognizing that when we take care of ourselves, we're also more able to take care of other people. Now that sounds kind of foreign because you go, gosh, well, if I spend time on myself, then I'm not going to have as much time to spend on other people. But here we're looking for quality, not quantity necessarily. And the quality of your care increases, and sometimes the quantity too, because you have more energy and more to give if you spend time focusing on yourself and caring for yourself. Now, I don't mean this in a self-absorbed way, that we are supposed to be selfish or anything like that, but I do mean this in a self-centered way, which is meaning a centered self. It's a different way of thinking and using that term. So a centered self is one who knows who they are, who understands their limitations, who knows when they need a break, when to say yes, when to say no, and how to take care of themselves, and also how to reach out for that help. That's a centered self, very different from a selfish or a self-absorbed person. Okay, I just want to differentiate between that. So the first question that I would encourage you guys to be thinking through when it comes to self-care is, how do you know when you need to, quote unquote, beef it up in the area of self-care? What are your triggers? How do you know personally, hey, I'm really slacking on the things that I need to do in order to take care of myself? So for me, I have a wake-up call when it comes to self-care, when I'm not eating right, when I'm not exercising, and when I'm staying up really late at night and watching mindless TV shows that I really don't care about, but I just find myself watching them over and over. That is my wake-up call. When I find myself staying up watching TV, I go, something's off here. I need to reevaluate. So I would encourage y'all to think about, what is it that are the triggers for me that I can tell, okay, my self-care is kind of lacking here, and I need to do some things to reprioritize, restructure, reorganize my life in order to kind of beef that up for me. Now, there are important aspects of self-care because really this is a holistic thing. Okay, so physically, how do you take care of yourself? How do you exercise? How much sleep do you get every night? What kind of food do you eat? Emotionally, are you bottling up emotions? Or are you hysterical? Are you unable to control emotions? Are you going to a therapist maybe to talk about some of these things? That's part of your emotional health, is reaching out to others. Relationally, are you involving people in your life that offer you a mutual relationship? In a helping profession, it's very easy to be in a lot of relationships with people, but the relationships are unequal because you are constantly giving out, and it's not mutual where they're bringing it back around to you and filling you up also. Socially, do you have outlets that you can just kind of kick back and relax and enjoy yourself? Spiritually, do you have spiritual practices that are meaningful to you? And the reason I want to touch on this is oftentimes people say, well, in order to be spiritually healthy, it looks like reading the Bible, praying, going to church, being in a small group, all of those sorts of things, which are all wonderful. But it's possible also that maybe there's some spiritual practices that you can involve in your life that fill you up in a different way. Maybe it's journaling, maybe it's meditation, fasting, sitting outside, listening to music, all of those sorts of things. What are the spiritual practices that you can involve in your life that fill you up and allow you to take care of yourself? And finally, professionally. Are you involved in any sort of a professional community, maybe supervision, maybe a consultation group, or like a continuing ed type thing? Those are all important aspects of self-care and something I might encourage you all to be looking at to see how are you taking care of yourself in those ways. I think it's so important to recognize that as counselors, we are human too. We do not have it all together. And so taking care of ourselves and reaching out for support and exampling boundaries are going to be some of the most important things that we can do as human beings that make us a better counselor also. So, really quickly, let's talk about boundaries. And I'm going to talk about this based off of a little bit about what I've learned. But I want to just explain to you, a lot of times, especially in the church, when we talk about the word boundaries, we talk about it in terms of relationships and specifics of what you can and what you can't do in a relationship. I know growing up in a youth group, a lot of times we talked about boundaries in regards to physicality in relationship. What's okay, what's not okay. We kind of make lists. But I would like to invite you to a new concept of boundaries, and that is I view boundaries more like this in a circle, okay? And the things that are inside of this circle right here are the things that are okay for us to do, and the boundaries around us are what keeps us safe. And everything outside of there is not necessarily safe. And I don't mean necessarily physically safe, but I mean those might be taxing or unhealthy relationships or those sorts of things. So when we put boundaries around our lives and our work, what we do is we create this space where we're comfortable and safe to live out of. So what that might look like in a very professional sense that then of course aids in your personal life is having office hours. Are you available at all times to all people? Or do you say, you know what, I'm here from 9 to 5 on this day, and that's when I can see you. That's when I'll take calls. That's when I email. How do you deal with phone calls, text messages, and email? Do you have specific times that you answer them back, or are you available at all times of all days? That's something to think about. Are you able to leave work at work? Do you walk out of your office and allow everything from the day to stay there in the office and come back to it the next day, or is it something that you bring home with you? Maybe you physically bring home paperwork and cases, which is okay to do sometimes, but is that kind of then trickling over into your personal life? Is there one of the things that I like to do is to talk about mindfulness in terms of taking work home, because as a counselor, we're very, very susceptible of thinking about and taking cases home with us because we're in the midst of it in people's lives. And so some of the things that I've found is kind of having some rituals or some traditions that we can take part in order to allow us space between our lives and our work that allows us then those boundaries and the time to just get away and to take care of ourselves and to engage in relationships and families and those sorts of things. So a couple of rituals that you might have is kind of doing a mental body scan when you walk outside your office and just kind of see if there's anything from the day that you're holding and allow it to kind of stay in your office and kind of watch yourself and picture yourself putting it back in your office. Maybe it's saying a prayer at the end of the day and offering your clients back to the Lord and saying, okay, God, I've done everything that you have asked me to do today. Please take care of them until the next time I see them again. Maybe there's a process that you have between here and when you drive home. For me, that looks like absolute silence. When I'm done with counseling for the day, I don't do well with noise. And so I like to just have a moment of silence. I have like a 12-minute drive between my office and my home. And so I like to be absolutely silent. I don't text message, I don't talk on the phone, I don't listen to the radio or any sort of music. I just let silence happen. Other times people find it helpful to talk to somebody. So maybe they call somebody that there's a very mutual relationship with, and they can kind of process a little bit and kind of transition back into their other life. I would encourage you guys to find some sort of a way to offer space between you and the rest of your life in a personal and professional sense, to give you some space in order to re-engage into life, so that all the counseling stuff doesn't have to take over and kind of trickle into your personal life, which then trickles over into your own self-care. We're going to pause the video here, and I will continue the talk about self-care in another video.